Wow, what a sound. What a way to begin. But that's engagement, baby. Hi, hello. Welcome to my channel. My name is Emmy. I am a storyteller, witch, and a final girl. This is Memento Mori Monday. We talk about death, dying, grief. If you have any questions or interest in learning more about any cultural things, if there's a way of talking about death and dying that you're wanting me to offer my 2 cents on, I'm also very down for that too. You can email for submitting your questions, and you can also find me on Instagram, share your ideas. So far, nobody has scandalized me yet. That is not an invitation. It's not an invitation to scandalize me. Before we dig in to today's topic, which is a very, very hot topic, I went from not hearing this question a lot to hearing this question enough to move it up my list. I have quite a list. Oh, geez. I have 18 videos on my YouTube tracker. That's how locked in I am. So nobody say that I'm not. I'm not committed. But yeah, I went from hearing this a little bit to a lot. Before we dive in, our disclaimer. Feel free to pause to read it, screenshot it. Basically, does not replace official advice. Feel free to get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to help you find somebody who is aligned with what you're needing. And I might be a death doula, but I'm not your death doula until we actually talk in an official capacity. Let's dive into our question. How did you become a death doula? Like I said, I went from not hearing this question a terrible amount to hearing it enough that this got moved up the pipeline. And I do feel like so much of that has to do with the current state of the world, and that there is like a growing curiosity. I feel like we kind of go through a cycle where there isn't really a whole lot of interest in being a death worker. And then there's like a huge surge of people being really, really invested in it, which we love to see it. We need more voices doing it. So much of me becoming one was a matter of I didn't see enough people of color. I'm Puerto Rican. I also identify as Afro-Indigenous. And there weren't enough people like me at the time in 2015 that I felt could speak to my experience. Having even somebody who looks like you, I know can play a big role in whether or not you feel supported, cultural context for everything. So it was really, really important for me to step in and to really give back to my community in that way. We do go by many names, so death doula, death midwife, end of life consultant, or end of life anything. People who are both witchy as well as kind of death workers may go by psychopomp. And as I've kind of peppered in, a lot of us do use death worker. A death companion has kind of been growing due to a lot of feelings, concerns around the implications historically of the word doula. I have erred on the side of using death doula because I feel like enough people have been using it that I feel like it minimizes confusion about what I do. And death worker, I feel when I've tried using that, I feel miscommunicates it in the same way that I have found death midwife will get misunderstood as well. Technically, I am a certified death midwife. That is what my certificate reads based on the program that I did. The trainings will vary. I'll talk about kind of my journey though, because everyone's is a little bit different. So it really does go further back than going to be a death doula, death midwife in 2015. We did a pod swap, Mortality and the Morgue by Rochelle Uni. And she was on my podcast, I was on hers. Really, really lovely experience. We talked a little bit about both being morbid young people in a way, and that we were both interested in like the science of death, the kind of cultural components as well, that we both enjoyed Edgar Allan Poe and Tim Burton. So like there's like a cultural, artsy kind of standpoint. Come college, I studied psychology, counseling psych, and cultural anthropology came a little bit later. I was in symbolic anthropology, and my poor professor, she hated the death segment so much, and we all ate it up. We loved it. But yeah, she struggled. That curriculum about the anthropology of death really just set me down like, oh, there's like a whole other world. There are so many ways that different cultures not only openly talk about it, but there's a relationship that they have with their dead. And there's just so much more to this than what we're doing in Western culture. And that kind of led me down the academic track. And then a few years later, I learned about Ask a Mortician and Order of the Good Death. And that then made me feel like, oh, these are my people. What these people are doing is what I feel I am called to do. I didn't learn about a death doula, death midwife, until meeting with a friend to babysit her child. She and I were catching up, and I let her know that I had heard of the Order of the Good Death and the interest that I had. And then she said, hey, have you ever heard of a death doula? And I said, I have never heard of such thing. And she recommended that I reach out to a colleague of hers. She thought, okay, maybe this might be good for you. And took a little bit of time to think about it. I still didn't know whether or not I wanted to go the full-on funeral director route, because every state is going to be different. You could be a mortician only in one state, and then it requires having a funeral director license and all that jazz. Some states are, you have to be trained in mortuary science in order to be a funeral director at all. It really does depend on where you live. I ultimately landed on the training that I did because I wanted spiritual, and at the same time, I valued a lot of practical understanding, because the way that we were trained on how to talk about what we do is that a death midwife offers emotional, spiritual, and practical support to the dying in their communities. It's like, well, what more could I ask for? That's everything that I want to do. And at the time, I didn't know if I wanted to do holding vigil. I didn't know if I wanted to focus more on the logistical aspect of death work, which would be the advanced directives component. I just was figuring it out, and I determined that through doing it through Earth Traditions, I'll include their information and a few other certification programs that I have known to be valuable, have been beneficial to the people who have signed up for it. I found it to be a really wonderful experience. On one hand, the experience kind of had me feeling like, wait, I went and I taught myself all of this already. There is plenty, though, that I am glad that I had the hands-on experience for, because if I hadn't had that, then I might not be able to speak to whether I do like that or not, or whether or not I want that to be included in my practice. So I am grateful for that. I do continue to self-educate as best I can. I have a death shelf of the resources that I find helpful around the work that I do. I have been finding it helpful to be in conversation with other death doulas lately. If there's conversations that maybe we should tag team on, or if something happens on a collective level, like what we're seeing with climate change, like what we're seeing with the state of the world in general, that there's different kind of layers of grief that people are already experiencing, then it's great to touch base on that way. I think if you ask this question from the standpoint of you're interested in doing it yourself, I think there are a few kind of areas that you can reflect on and ask yourself whether this is appealing to you. As I noted, I didn't know if I was going to be very much on board with like, get your advanced directives together, focus on holding vigil for people, offering support with planning, and if ecological components, like the fact that even the dead have to worry about their carbon footprint. It's that component of being able to help route people to what is available when it comes to green burial. And if that's a little bit complicated, given proximity and budget, then seeing where we could find a little bit of a middle ground where you're able to marry your ecological desires with the realities of the world that you're in, the laws of the place that you're living in. The key thing to also note about being a death doula is that we do not replace hospice. We do not replace traditional funeral workers. Again, it depends on where you live. Here in Illinois, you do need somebody licensed to move a body from one place to another, from like the home, for instance, to where it's going to be buried. You are able to have a home funeral in Illinois. That isn't an issue. But the issue does become like how are you going to move it safely, securely, according to the law. But in other states, you're able to kind of do it all on your own as long as it's documented and there isn't an issue there. You're also able legally to be buried on your property, but again, that does require that pre-planning component. I have really done all of the above up to now, and I have found that focusing on the grief component, so grief support, is a really, really big one. I do value pre-planning education. If you're wanting a video about advance directives, I'd be more than happy to put that together for you. Just let me know. It'll be through the lens of what I know to be legal, the boundaries within Illinois, but I'd be more than happy to put that together. I have found that it's very important for me to encourage people to empower themselves with information, to realize that so much of all of this is about community and about working with the people that you know and trust. And if you don't have that, then either working with a death doula or finding people who you do think could be of support, I think that's integral. Another thing I want to name, in the event that you're interested in a program, if you are kind of on the fence, not all programs are the same. Like, I've learned that my program focuses a bit more on the biological component than a few other programs where I feel like they got a bit more coaching on kind of the emotional aspects of it. So they have more in their toolkit in that way. So every program is different. And if you're still a little bit too on the fence and it doesn't feel like there's enough in the pro doing it category, then I would recommend looking at a few books and maybe talking to another death doula before you undergo that journey for yourself. It could be its own emotional experience for you, knowing that what you're learning is to help people and the people around the person dying with this inevitable collective experience. That is a very big responsibility, and it should be treated as a big responsibility. So I would recommend just continue to be curious, continue to learn as best you can, and really take a moment to think about, why do you want to do it? If it is something that you're feeling called to do, if part of you're worried about judgment, or you're worried about people making comments, or if you already were labeled as like the dark, spooky kid, in my view, give them something else to talk about. If they want to label you as like the spooky little kid, then really give them something to write home about. That's my point of view, though. I like having very, very thick lore. But yeah, that is my perspective. That was my journey. So began very academic. We went the route of very kind of cultural, artsy kind of kid, to being very academic, to moving into more of an applied space. And once I kind of had that spectrum, knowing that I wouldn't want to go the route of a traditional funeral director, I took some time to figure out, over the past decade, the beauty of being a death doula is that you can follow a pathway or you can create one, because this is not something new, what we're doing. We're reclaiming the fact that taking care of each other during these really, really hard points of life, taking care of our dying and those that are grieving and mourning is our right. And it is something that we have always had for so long, but it was separated from us. It was in many ways taken away and monetized and corporatized. If you're wondering whether or not you should do it, I think you should, especially if you want to inject your creativity into it. If you want to work with people in a creative way around death and dying and their grief. I've been working with a lot of people around grief, around their pets. If that's something that is very, very close to home for you, then there's a way you can give back too. If you have any more questions about it, if you're like, I do want to go the route of being a death doula, but I have these reservations, I have these concerns, you could definitely ask them down below, or you could reach out to me separately because I understand that that is a very personal situation. Let me know if you have considered becoming a death doula, if you've ever worked with a death doula. Some of you are like, you are my death doula. And want to say thank you for your support and for just being with me for 10 years. That's really, really wonderful, because some of you have been around for even before me being on YouTube. You've been a part of my journey for well over 10 years. And I am so grateful for all of that support, especially when there have been people who have had their own opinions about this calling, because I feel like it's so much more than just whether or not you're doing something for somebody. You're doing so deeply personal and significant at what could be the hardest point in someone's life. So thank you all for being here, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.